Hello, everyone. This is Eleanor Rigby. I was sitting here by the window this morning, holding this small tarnished silver locket. It doesn't say have a picture in it anymore, just a tiny folded piece of notebook paper from 1974. The ink has faded to a ghostly gray, but I don't need to read the words to remember what they say. I was looking at this and thinking about the passage of time, how it moves like a river, sometimes smooth and sometimes treacherous, carving out canyons in our souls that we never expected to be there. If I hadn't learned the hard lessons that this little piece of paper represents, if I hadn't found a way to breathe through the suffocating weight of betrayal, I would have lost everything. I would have died a bitter woman, and I didn't want that to be my legacy. Before I tell you this story, please subscribe. I want to pass this wisdom down before I am gone, so you don't make the same mistakes I did, and so you can find peace in a world that often feels so chaotic. Let me tell you the truth. It isn't easy to say these words out loud. Even at my age, I spent 45 years married to a man named Arthur. We met in the late 60s, back when the air felt thick with change and music. He was a tall man with hands that smelled like cedarwood and old paper, and when he looked at me, I felt like the only person on this green earth. We didn't have a penny to our names. When we started out, we lived in a tiny apartment where the heater rattled like a dying engine all winter, but we didn't care. We were building a life, or at least that's what I told myself every morning as I poured his coffee. But there is a shadow that followed me for 20 of those years. 20 years? Think about that. That is 2 decades of birthdays, anniversaries, and Sunday dinners. For 20 years, my husband was leading a double life. I remember the exact moment the first seed of doubt was planted. It was 1982. We were living in a small suburb, the kind of place where everyone knew your business, or so I thought. Arthur started staying late at the office, claiming the economy was tightening and he had to put in the extra hours to keep us afloat. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He would come home late, smelling of cold air and fatigue, and I would have a plate warm for him in the oven. "I'm just doing this for us, Eleanor," he'd say. I can still hear his voice, that low, steady rumble that used to make me feel so safe. "Just a few more months of this, and we'll be over the hump." But the months turned into years. The hump never ended. I began to notice small things. The way he'd pull his hand away if I reached for it unexpectedly, or the way he started keeping his briefcase locked. Young people today might not understand this because you have your cell phones and your tracking apps, but back then, a secret could live in the silence of a house for a very long time. You had to rely on your gut, and my gut was screaming, but I silenced it. I pushed it down because I loved him, and because in those days, you didn't just walk away. You stayed, you endured. The middle years, the 90s, were the hardest. We had children by then, and the house was full of noise and light, but I felt like I was living in a graveyard. I found a receipt once, tucked into the lining of an old coat I was taking to the cleaners. It was for a jewelry store in a town 2 hours away. It was dated for our 15th anniversary. That year, Arthur had given me a toaster. A toaster. I sat on the floor of the laundry room and held that receipt until the edges curled from the sweat on my palms. I didn't confront him then. I was afraid. I was terrified that if I pulled on that single thread, the entire tapestry of my life would unravel, and I'd be left standing naked in the cold. I convinced myself that maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he was helping a friend. The lies we tell ourselves are often much more elaborate than the lies others tell us. I spent 20 years looking into the eyes of a man I realized I didn't truly know. We shared a bed, we shared a name, and we shared the raising of our children, but there was a wall between us that I couldn't climb. It wasn't until 2002 that the truth finally came crashing through the front door. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment. There were no screams or broken glass, just a woman younger than me but with eyes that looked just as tired showing up at my garden gate while I was pruning the roses. She didn't have to say much. She just looked at me and said, "Eleanor, I can't do this anymore. He told me he was leaving you 10 years ago. I'm tired of waiting." The world went very quiet in that moment. I could hear a bird chirping in the oak tree and the sound of a neighbor's lawnmower in the distance. I realized that for 20 years I had been the other part of his life. Even though I was the wife, he had been maintaining another household, another heart, for 2 decades. When Arthur came home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. I just sat him down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd helped our kids with their homework and celebrated their graduations, and I placed that old receipt from 1982 and a new list of questions in front of him. "Let me tell you the truth," I said to him. "I have known for a long time that you weren't fully here, but I didn't know how much of you was gone. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was the hardest year of my life. We spent months in a silence that was heavier than any grief I've ever known." He confessed everything: the long drives, the diverted money, the thousands of lies required to keep two worlds from colliding. He begged for forgiveness. He cried until he couldn't breathe. Experience has taught me that people think the end of a story like this is either a divorce or a perfect reconciliation, but life is rarely that clean. I stayed. In all my 80 years, that was the most controversial decision I ever made. My friends told me I was a fool. My own sister wouldn't speak to me for a month. But I looked at this man, this broken, dishonest man who had wasted 20 years of our loyalty, and I saw someone who was finally, for the first time, being honest. You have to understand something about marriage that people today often forget. Love isn't a feeling you have. It's a decision you make every morning. Sometimes you make that decision when your heart is full, and sometimes you make it when your heart is a jagged piece of glass in your chest. I stayed because I realized that our life together was more than just his betrayal. It was the 45 years of history, the children we raised, the house we built, and the person I had become because of the struggle. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I was strong enough to carry the weight of his failure until he was strong enough to help me hold it. We spent the last decade of his life truly knowing one another. It was a different kind of marriage, one stripped of the illusion of youth. It was raw, it was quiet, and in a strange way, it was more honest than the first 30 years had ever been. Why did the marriage survive? It survived because I chose to value the we more than my own justified anger. I'm not saying everyone should stay. Some betrayals are meant to be the end. But for me, I wanted to see the end of the book, not just the dark chapters in the middle. Patience isn't just waiting for things to get better. It's the work you do while you wait. In my 80 years, I've seen how modern dating has changed. Everything is so disposable now. If a phone breaks, you get a new one. If a relationship has a crack, you throw it away and swipe for the next. But there is a beauty in the mended thing, a plate that has been broken and glued back together with gold. The way the Japanese do it is more valuable and more beautiful than one that has never been tested. Sacrifice is a word that has gone out of fashion, but it is the bedrock of a life well lived. You sacrifice your pride, you sacrifice your right to be right, and you sacrifice the fantasy of a perfect partner for the reality of a human one. Arthur passed away 4 years ago. In his final days, he held my hand and told me that his greatest regret wasn't the years he spent away, but the fact that he almost missed the woman I really was because he was too busy hiding. I promise you, when you get to the end of your road, you won't care about who won the arguments. You will care about who was holding your hand when the sun went down. Loyalty is a long-term investment. It doesn't pay out in a day or a month. It pays out when you are old and gray, and you can look at someone and say, "We survived the storm." There is a profound peace in knowing you didn't run when things got ugly. I want you to be happy. I really do. But don't mistake happiness for a life without pain. Real happiness is the quiet satisfaction of knowing you lived with integrity, even when the person across from you didn't. It's about being able to look at yourself in the mirror and know that your heart stayed open, even when it had every reason to close. Summary of the lesson is simple, though practicing it is not. Forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Hold on to your values tighter than you hold on to your grudges. And remember that time is the only thing we can't get back, so don't spend it waiting for a perfect life. Build a real one instead. Thanks for listening to An Old Soul. Subscribe, share this with someone you love, and cherish them while they are here. Life is shorter than you think, but it's long enough to find grace if you're looking for it. Would you like me to share more about how we rebuilt our trust in those final years